it's such a different film to anything we really get over here, for one thing. Can you tell us, firstly, a little bit about it?
Well, yeah. Marianne is one of those movies. I started working on this in 2003. I think I got the idea in 2003, and then when I was in film school and I wanted to make a Swedish horror movie, because there weren't any real Swedish horror movies being made, because the Swedish Film Institute at the time, and still to some degree, don't really fund genre film, and especially not horror film, because horror film is not quality and it's not good because it's genre, you know. So I started thinking, well, what kind of horror movie would work, and why don't horror movies work? Because I've seen a couple of horror movies in Sweden, from Sweden, that try to, where the filmmakers have been watching a lot of American movies, and they try to make an Americanized horror movie, and it doesn't really work because we have such a different culture here.
Yeah.
In Sweden, we're really good at making kitchen sink realism. That's what we're doing, because that's kind of what our culture sort of is about, you know. That sort of realistic simplicity that you could put on film, that really works with our language and the social culture that is presented within the story. Marianne, I wanted to make Marianne about something Swedish, like Swedish folklore, which is something I'm really interested in, and like a Swedish kitchen sink realist horror. About a personal story about my hometown where I grew up, and that whole area, that particular neighborhood, and have it take place in sort of an actual place, a real place that exists. And it's metaphorically, Marianne is a very autobiographical piece about me growing up and the stuff that happened to me and the people, the kind of stuff that happened to me and the people around me, in my family and my friends, you know, things that people, it's a combination. In some scenes, one character does something and that's kind of reflects something that maybe I did or maybe someone else did, but it's not like one character is me. You know, they're all me and they're all everyone else. It's a combination. It's a hodgepodge.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it is. You know, it's about a man who is haunted by guilt, and at the same time a mare, which not the horse, but he's haunted by a creature from Swedish folklore called the mare, which is where the word nightmare comes from. And that's basically what it is. A mare, well, it depends on what, you know, Sweden is it depends on what part of Sweden if you're looking at folklore. I know you're interested in folklore. Different parts in Sweden have different explanations for what a mare is. It's a woman whose body is transformed at night, and she comes in and sort of haunts men. She rides their chest. She sits on their chest and gives them awful nightmares. And in some parts of Sweden, the woman is cursed. Like if her mother was very afraid of giving childbirth, and she was afraid of pain, she could crawl 3 times through like the mucous membrane from a cow, for like the what do you call it, the placenta? No, I don't know, whatever. So from she could crawl 3 times through that, and the childbirth would be painless. But if she gets a daughter, she would become a mare, and if she gets a son, he would become a werewolf. So not like a Hollywood werewolf, but like a folklore type werewolf, like a shapeshifter.
Right, got it.
Oh, well, you know what a Hollywood werewolf is.
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
something like The Howling or An American Werewolf in London or The Wolfman. That's a Hollywood
Yeah.
werewolf.
Right.
Folklore werewolf in Sweden is something a lot different. It's someone who can transform into a wolf, I think, at any given time. It's like a shapeshifter, basically, from Star Trek or something. I don't know. But so it's not like the way it always is in the movies about someone who is transformed every full moon and he's cursed, and you know. Although that's a very interesting way of telling a story.
Yeah.
A mare is kind of more like that.
Yeah. So in terms of, I mean, the reason I'm asking this, I think I know, I must be honest, but I'm literally just so we can tease out the cultural differences, because to most people, like in England and I'm guessing in America, we, as I'm sure you know, view folklore very, very, very differently, generally speaking, which is really sad. But I mean, the idea of a shapeshifter, most people won't have a clue what that necessarily means. They'll be thinking of comic books.
Well, you've seen Cat People, right?
Yes.
You know, the movie Cat People, the remake. I'm
Yeah.
talking about the remake now. Yeah, I haven't seen the original. I really want to, though.
Yeah.
But they're like shapeshifters, and they can transform, right? And that's more like the way werewolves are, I think, in folklore.
Yes.
I think. I'm not, you know, that much of an expert on this, but I think so.
So in terms of feeling, it's far more about a way of being as opposed to, oh, I've got some kind of inner curse thing and I'm going to howl at the moon. It's far more about a thing of being controlled, yeah?
Well, yeah, because Hollywood werewolves are a metaphor. At its best, it's a metaphor for, you know, the monster within. And being afraid of your, like, if you have a character and the character is a pedophile, that's kind of hard. It's hard to write a film about a pedophile, but if you write a film about a werewolf who kind of goes through the same thing, then it's easier for the audience to accept. Because it's not as emotionally charged as maybe a pedophile is. So that's why we tell fantasy stories.
Yes.
Because it's metaphors.
Yeah.
A mare is kind of like that. It's sometimes it's a woman who's cursed like that, or sometimes it's just a woman who wants revenge for something. And there are different stories. There's one story about a mare. See, the mare can come into the house through any opening. If it's a small hole in the wall, she can come through there.
Yeah.
So in one story, there's a man and he's being haunted every night by a mare, and he's having these awful nightmares. He wakes up, he's drenched in sweat, and someone tells him, "Well, you're being haunted by a mare." So one night, before she exits the house, he gets up and he plugs the hole.
Yeah.
And she appears. She's still there, and she suddenly appears, and she kind of wakes up. She hasn't known that she was a mare. He introduces himself to her, and she introduces herself to him, and they talk and sit down and have a coffee or whatever. And eventually, they get to know each other, and eventually, they even get married. So they live their life. They're married. They had, I don't know, kids or whatever.
Yeah.
And she's fine. Because he sort of woke her up from this curse or whatever, and she's now fine. But then one day they're having an argument, and he says, "Well, you didn't have that kind of mouth on you back when you were a mare, and I saved you," or whatever. And he kind of reminds her that she was a mare, and she's poof, and she's gone, and he never sees her again.
Good God.
And that's a real folklore story.
Wow.
And there are others. There are versions of that where he plugs the hole when she's on the way out, so she only has like 9 fingers or something because she was on her way out. So like part of her was gone already when he plugged the hole. You know, there are other folklore stories. Marianne is a mixture of all these things, and it's I've taken bits and pieces from different types of stories and put them in a modern setting, and I also try to analyze the real phenomena behind the mare, which is sleep paralysis and hallucinations that you get, like when you wake up before your body wakes up, and you're still paralyzed from sleep. It's called sleep paralysis. You have that every night, but sometimes you wake up before your body does, and that's a really scary moment to wake up because you're kind of half dreaming, half awake, and your body is giving you these hallucinations. You can lie down and be fully aware, but you're seeing someone standing in the doorway. Yes. And it's a really scary feeling. You get so it's one of the scariest things you can ever imagine. And you have the sense that someone is watching you. And this is a common phenomenon. It's called hypnopomp hallucinations. You can also have hypnagogue, I think, hallucinations, which is when you get that when you're falling asleep. Yes.
They're also known as night hags and night terrors over here as well.
Well, yeah. Night terrors, though, isn't that kind of like when you wake up screaming and you don't know why?
Not as much as far as I'm aware. I mean, there may be slight distinction. I mean, the one I know primarily in England is a night hag, where again it's generally the night hag thing came from. It would be a little old woman, literally a hag or a witch, sitting on you or standing next to you.
Yeah,
night terrors, I think, it's kind of Yeah,
and also you have the succubus and the incubus. Yeah. And one of my favorites, when I was in grade school, when I was a kid, I used to read a lot about UFOs. And one of the most common stories by abductees were, I was sleeping in my bed and suddenly there they were in my room and I couldn't move and they paralyzed me with some paralyzing ray, and then they took me out to their spaceship and whatever. And that's exactly it, except, you know, someone is talking about aliens and think it's for real. That's and this is, you know, really common thing. I used to hear these stories all the time when I was a kid, and I know that my mother, my dad died when I was very young, and we had a lot of problems with his father, my grandfather. To make a long story short, my mother found another guy when I was like 20, and they used to think that my dead grandfather they could feel his presence, and they woke up and they couldn't move, and I had to tell them that no, it's just sleep paralysis you're having.
Wow.
But you know, it's very real. It's a very real thing to feel, and it's very scary. Yeah. It's completely safe, and it's very common. Like 60% of population, probably at least, can experience this every now and then or once. So it's an interesting thing. And if you look at horror texts, like everything from Paranormal Activity, you have that, where you have the story about how when they were kids, they used to feel, you know, the thing watching them in their bed, and you have it in Dracula in the book, when you know you find it if you're aware of it, you can find it in horror texts, you know, everywhere. But I haven't found anything made about the mare, which was kind of one of the things that I really wanted to do, because that's exactly what it's about.
It's a funny thing to do, really, in a sense. I think it's actually really effective because, as you say, I mean, I've had a lot of sleep paralysis myself in the past. It is absolutely terrifying. The only way to break it, the only way I've ever found to break it, if you can move one tiny finger, it snaps. But you have to do it. You literally will make a sound. And the funny thing is, the actual because it's often associated with high levels of stress. The interesting thing in that sense is where, particularly when we're talking about metaphor, where you become more afraid of the sleep paralysis or supernatural element or whatever else it may be that you're reading it as opposed to the stress of the situation that's causing it. How do you feel that works within the dynamic of Marianne?
Well, one of the things also that I think is important is anxiety. And anxiety is, something that comes from guilt. Usually when you feel anxiety over something, if you kind of analyze it, why you're feeling this way, there's usually some amount of guilt in there that you lay upon yourself. And Marianne, is about a man who is very flawed, and he was unfaithful to his wife, and his wife and his kid found out about it, and kind of drove him away, or he left. And then he comes back 10 years later, and he works as a teacher for at the high school when his daughter starts at the high school, and he kind of sees what she's become. Like, she's this really unhappy, teenager. She's bullied, she's alone, she's sad. You have a guy who's feeling really guilty about what he's done and what he's doing, and he's got a lot of anxiety problems, but they're so beneath the surface of this, because he's such a, he's that kind of guy who never deals with his emotional issues.
Yeah.
So the whole mare thing is really him kind of losing it after being put through all this stress and all this stuff that's kind of going on in his life. And that's stress, anxiety. You have the sleep paralysis, and that's the mare.
You're getting this tension between the supernatural and a very human story where even though the people may not be behaving in the way that we might like to think that we might, you really feel bad for.
Well, yeah. And, there are two ways to analyze Marianne, if you will. You can see it as, well, he's being haunted by a supernatural being. Or you can see it as he's being haunted by guilt. And well, either way works. To me, it was never about the supernatural. It was about the supernatural and the real kind of being the same thing, or different sides of the same coin. It's like the mare can be real and not real at the same time, because the effects it's having is kind of what makes it real. And I was always a major fan of Neil Gaiman and the Sandman comics. And they kind of work, I think, the same way, that you can see it as a metaphor, or you can see it as a real fantasy story, depending on what you prefer. But personally, I think the metaphor is more interesting.
Yeah. How prevalent is, the folklore in present-day Sweden? I mean, the storytelling aspect of it. I mean, I imagine it's quite a generational thing.
Well, it's not like Iceland. In Iceland, it's very, it's very out there. In Sweden, in the north of Sweden, you still have it. And where I'm from the central of Sweden, but the top 2/3 of Sweden is called the Northlands. And I'm from the right and the central, in a very small isolated town. And so when I was a kid, I had, we call them the little people. They're kind of like hobbits or gnomes. There was a guy in my class whose dad he worked a lot. His father was actually like a shop class teacher at our school, and they were out a lot in the forest, and they did a lot of that kind of hiking and stuff. And the guy who was in my class, he told me that once he had seen the little people, and I know my grandmother, on my mother's side, did. She had seen the little people too. So it's still kind of around, and if you go out into the if you go out in the countryside, you can still talk to people who very much believe in this stuff.
Yeah.
And if you go further north and stuff, but here in the south where I live now, it's like people don't even know what it is. So it's disappearing,
Really?
and it's disappearing, and every generation it's people know less about it. So that was also one of the incentives to make Marianne. It's like I wanted to kind of document this before it goes away completely.
Good God, yes. Thank you so much for doing it. Seriously. Thank you. We need to retain this stuff. It really annoys me where people just forget. And it's so sad because it's so much about what makes who the hell you are. It's what you are, and it's amazing. Anyway, sorry, my fangirl for folklore rant over.
well, no, you're absolutely right. And in Sweden, we have such amazing folklore in Sweden. We have, the creatures we have. It's like you wouldn't believe. There's Näcken, which is an old man with long beard who sits naked in a stream, and he plays the violin. And you can go there.
Wow.
And he can teach you to play the violin, kind of like the way if you go to a crossroads, you can meet the devil, and he can play. It's kind of the same thing.
Wow.
And he will lure you into the water too, and horses and people. He will lure them into the water and drown them. So he's kind of, I wouldn't say evil, but like you wouldn't want to get too close to this guy. And then there's the Skogsrå. That's probably my favorite folklore creature in Sweden after the mare. The Skogsrå it's a woman, a beautiful woman, and you can see. Well, she's not human, but you can see her out in the woods. And there are different types. Some of them look like humans.
Yeah.
Except when they turn around, there's a big hole in their back.
Oh my God! Right. Okay.
And some of them, sometimes they have a tail. Some of them have like slight fur, and they will lure you into the woods, and you won't be seen again. They're like sirens,
Yes, I was thinking about that. I mean, what happens to you when you go into the woods? What happens?
Well,
do you die? Do you go
lost.
to another place? Or?
No, you get lost.
You get
lost.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And there's one called Gnoling, which is like a little child that, like, I don't know that much about that one, but it's like I think you can find him in houses, and he will like cry or whine. It's like a very small child. And you have the trolls, obviously, that they will replace people's children with their own, so that when they have a kid, they will replace their kid with the human child, so that humans, so kind of like the cuckoo, the way the cuckoo does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there are tomtar, which is like gnomes, like in David the Gnome. Kind of.
Oh, right.
Yeah. The Swedish version of the Santa Claus is actually a gnome in the beginning. We call him the Christmas gnome, is what we call him. And he used to be dressed in gray, but they changed it, obviously, after the Coca-Cola thing. They changed it to red.
Yeah.
Have
any of these ever have the ideas ever scared you? I mean, do you actually, you talk about them with a lot of love, do they actually scare you as well?
If you're up north in Sweden, and where I'm from, if you go out into the woods late at night, like in the summertime, when it doesn't really get dark, but you get this sort of twilight atmosphere, the way you have in Marianne, like all the nighttime in Marianne is very twilight-ish, because that's what it actually looks like at night.
Wow.
You know the scene in Marianne where Sandra gets out the window and she rides her bike down to the lake.
Yes.
We shot that at 1 a.m.
Oh.
Yeah, in available light. And that's how light it is. It looks like day. And if you go further up north, it's going to be even brighter. But if you go out into the woods, and you can see some of that in Marianne when she sees the guy, when she's sitting on the lake and she sees the guys go. That's exactly what it looks like, and it is kind of a little bit scary to go out into, because you get this sense, that it's I don't know, it's this weird archetypal fear that kind of grips you.
Yeah. Absolutely. So it's not even just about seeing the folkloric beastie. It's almost like the land itself becomes this magical realm the whole time, even though you've got this kitchen sink realism. The whole time it's kind of permeating through.
Right, and that was one of the reason why I wanted to shoot Marianne the way I shot it, with handheld camera and available light. Like everything in Marianne is available light. I wanted to have the documentary feel to it, to show that this is exactly what it looks like, and this is exactly how it feels to be in this environment.
Yeah.
And like I said, I grew up there. The house that Christer and Sandra is living in, that's like 2 blocks away from the house where I grew up in. And everything, all the locations in the film, in Marianne, is shot around there, and in the actual locations where, like, if Sandra was living there, and she would get out the window at night and get on the bike, it would take her 9 minutes to ride down to that lake. 9 minutes.
Yeah.
And the whole film is like that. So, like, this area exists, and you could totally go there and you can check out all these locations.
Yeah. And it makes sense, because when you do get the scares, by God, they are scary. I to be honest, I think I smacked somebody around the head when the bedroom scene, I smacked the girl who's sitting next to me by the head. I'm sorry, Rebecca. It works. Yeah, I don't think she was impressed.
Well, it's. I think it's scarier also if you know this sleep paralysis fear. If you have it if you felt it, you can sort of see that and feel that. And if you're living with someone who is grinding their teeth after having seen Marianne, hopefully you will get something out of that too.
Yeah, shake the poor bugger away, for God's sake. Yeah, really. It really works. That contrast, as we say, between the kind of very, very realistic elements and stuff that, to give you a comparison, think Sinister. It's Jesus, yeah.
It's interesting how you going back to the folklore, how you mentioned that it's the real beliefs that people have in it varies. It's very much a regional thing. It's quite interesting because you contrast it to religion, and that's also these days that's a very regional thing. I mean, you look in America and you look at the southern states, and how often that's a more much more religious place. It's interesting that from place to place, people's beliefs change. Yeah,
absolutely. And we have like a small Bible belt in Sweden too, actually in the south.
All right. Okay.
Much smaller though, obviously, because Sweden is probably, the entire country of Sweden is probably smaller than America's Bible belt. But I mean, it's like local culture thing, and especially when it's organized the way religion is organized. It's, that's an interesting point.
I was interested in that sense, in the way that the boyfriend, is it Sven? I forget. The boyfriend who comes in the kind of... Sorry? Stiff, that's the one. I knew it was an S. He's very, very funny, isn't he? I mean, what kind of reflection does he bring onto the whole kind of belief system? Because he's actually very funny, isn't he?
Yeah, Yeah, he is. Stiff is played by a friend of mine called Dylan. And he and I we've known each other for a few years, and we worked on this web TV series 2 years before I started making Marianne. And he's not an actor in the classical sense, and he doesn't really pursue acting, but he's really, really natural, and he kind of he brings something to a scene when he's very natural in front of the camera, and he's much better actor than you would think watching Marianne, because we talked about his character and the idea behind. There are a lot of ideas behind the Stiff character. It's based sort of on people that I've known. It's kind of based partly on a mutual friend that me and Dylan had, who had Asperger's. And yeah. So our kind of secret logic behind Stiff is that he's got a very slight case of Asperger's, but no one ever told him about it. And it's not like he's got a problem with it, but he does have some sort of problem recognizing how other people feel, which is his big tragedy as a character. And he's also kind of semi-based on this one guy I met once when I was, I think, 20 or 19. And I was talking to this ex-girlfriend of mine, and her boyfriend at the time came up to me and told me that he could read my mind, and he hadn't really believed it.
Yeah.
He was like this really weird guy. I can read minds, you know. I know what you're thinking.
Whoa.
Yeah. You know, there are a lot of people like that, and especially in small towns. And in small towns, you always have people who have that kind of nickname, and they're called Stiff, or they're called Stiffer, or whatever. You know, they're always. And this guy that came up to me and told me he could read minds, his name was actually Stefan. So that's kind of where that got started, and I started calling him Stiff. Because there's a comedy duo in Sweden called Stefan and Christer, and I couldn't have the characters being called Stefan and Christer. I had to call him Stiff. Otherwise everyone in Sweden would say, "Hey," it would be too funny. Yes, but Dylan is like one of those guys. When he comes in front of the camera into a scene, he kind of changes the mood by coming into a scene. And you sort of see that, and he does this naturally, and it's very, very good when you have a film that's all about, you know, misery.
Yes.
And death, and even more misery, and feeling sad, and missing people who are dead, and people dying left and right, like family members dying. Then it's like you gotta have somebody who comes in and is some form of comic relief without being, you know, too funny. But so I wrote this character Stiff for my friend Dylan, and told him that he could have it, and it's written especially for him. So that's kind of where it came from.
Earlier on, you mentioned that the film had been kind of labelled as elevated drama. And what would you actually, you know, class the film as? And how do you think the lines blur between horror and drama? And if you know, really they are perhaps one in the same, in a sense?
Well, it's so hard, you know. To me, Marianne is a horror film because it has a monster, and it's all about the themes that horror films are about. It's about intrusion and sin, and mortality, and our bodies being machines that can totally break down. And this is what horror is about. And it has a monster. But that said, Marianne, the A story, when you write a film, you have something called the A story, which is the major story arc that the whole film balances on.
Yeah.
And then you have B story, and you have C story, and you have different sort of, B story is usually, like a love story. And if Marianne had been a traditional horror film, then the way Drag Me to Hell is a traditional horror film. Then the A storyline would have been Christer being haunted by the mayor. And the B storyline would have been Christer and Sandra, father and daughter, and their relationship, and that would support the A story of the haunting. The way Drag Me to Hell is, the A story is the curse, and the B story is her relationship with a boyfriend. And her boyfriend doesn't understand her, and he thinks that she's being, unreasonable and going insane, and she doesn't know if she's going insane or not. It's kind of the same thing. But what I did, I wanted to do something that was more of a drama, because the film is such a personal story to me, and it's about. It was always really more about Sandra and the way that I felt losing most of my family actually died before I was 30. I still have my aunt, some cousins, and I have my sister, but my parents, all my grandparents died before I was 30. So I just wanted to write a story about what that kind of feels like when everyone is dying. So Sandra's story was kind of what that represented. So her story was very important to me. So I made the father and daughter conflict the A story. And in earlier drafts, the whole second act, like half the film, was more about Sandra. And she was also a main character, like a protagonist the way Christer is. But I moved away from that to focus on Christer. But the A storyline is still father and daughter conflict. And the B story is the haunting, which supports the father and daughter conflict. So technically, it's a drama. It's kind of complicated, but this is the way screenwriters think. So it's technically a drama, even though it's thematically and kind of structurally, in a way, a horror film. So it balances on that. And when a film, I heard this only a couple of weeks ago, though, nowadays, because this is kind of a trend now, especially in independent cinema, to make drama genres.
Yeah.
Kind of the way they do in South Korea, where every time you're watching a horror film in South Korea, it's a drama horror or a drama science fiction,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's a trend now, and they're calling it elevated genre.
Yes.
Apparently. So I don't know. I've always said it was a horror film, and most people, when they hear horror, they don't hear what I'm saying. They want to hear slasher. They want blood and guts, and Marianne was always more than that to me.
It's different. It's funny. I mean, I must be honest. I first saw Marianne at Leeds International Film Festival, and I'll be honest, I went back home. Well, I went back to the hotel that night, and there's a certain sound effect that goes through the film, a kind of rattling sound. I got to it really gets into your brain, and the entire idea of the film. I got through, and I shouldn't really say this, but never mind. I got through until about 5 in the morning. I was meant to be going home the next day to teach. I got through to 5 in the morning. I hadn't slept a wink because it scared the life out of me. I just gave up and went home at 6 in the morning.
Well,
it scared the life out of me.
Well, I take that as a huge compliment. And but a lot of people don't like being scared, and I say that when you're watching a horror film and you are scared that way, you're being affected by your film, and that's a great thing, to see a film and being emotionally affected by it to the point where you can't sleep. That's a really great feeling, because you have changed in some way.
Yes.
You have, you know.
Exactly. It hit me that the clever thing I found about it, and it only really afterwards, I'll be entirely honest, it burrows into your head because it's so much, it's one of these things that when you first watch it, sure you think, okay, the boogie screamy moment, but it's not that gets you, it's the worry and it's the paralysis of that anxiety that you can identify with, especially shot so realistically. You don't get it out of your head. God, I'll next day.
Well, I'm glad. If you know, that actually makes me very happy, because it means that, well, in some way I succeeded, you know. So I'm very glad you're telling me this.
And you've got something else coming up as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I hope so.
Project?
I was contacted a couple of months ago by this girl, and she's written this personal drama thing we call it Break of Dawn. No, sorry, Break of Day. Sorry, I can't even say the title. Mm-hmm. Break of Day. That's the official international title right now. Break of Day. And it's about a girl who is in her 30s, who moves down to Stockholm, and she's a part-time musician, and she's trying to get out of her shell after having lost her 4-year-old son Lucas to cancer. So she's kind of struggling with this emotionally, and she's in a really bad state, and she can't really get out of it. And there are a lot of dream sequences in it, and thematically, it ties into Marianne pretty well.
Yeah.
But it's a straight drama. There's no ghost, no mare, nor anything. And I'm producing this. And it's being directed by a girl called Jasmine Idun Lyman from Gothenburg.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know, we're trying to find financing for it, basically. And we might get it, we might not. We'll find out in November if we have financing. And if we do, we're going to go into production in January. And we're going to have it finished by November 2013 is the deadline for that. So it's a very quick project. Normally you would never make a feature film in 1 year, but this is special case if we get this financing. If we don't, we have to figure out a new financing plan. We have a screenplay, and we have, you know, a cast, and we have a crew, and we're building everything, and we're just getting ready to go into production if we get the money. So I'm really hoping for it.
Is there anything that the people out there can do to help? Is there anybody that we can press gang for you? Because seriously, I want to see something else in the guide, Marianne. Seriously, guys, you need to see this.
Well, go to the official website.
Yeah.
Filmengryning.se, where you can see a short concept reel that we shot, kind of like a pilot trailer kind of thing. I mean, we're talking about working together with cancer organizations, which is very important to me because my mother died from cancer. So, I mean, and it's a terrible disease. And this is a really touching film. Most of it's like the ending of it is so really nice, so sad and so nice at the same time.
Well, with that, I suppose we'd better let you go. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. I actually learned a hell of a lot.
Absolutely.
That was really nice.
Well, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope a lot of people watch Marianne now.
Yeah, they need to. Seriously, check out, you know, the stuff on It Cool. Ping this to your friends. Do it. You need to see this bloody film. Just don't, for Christ's sake, do something else before you go to bed, because you won't bloody sleep again. Yeah, oh, it was a mess. I was such a mess. I was lecturing the next day. Don't let my boss hear this, for Christ's sake. Oh dear, but seriously, thank you so much and really well done.
Thank you.